This is the Zarfend 4-season easy setup glamping tent. I just wanted to share my experience with this in case anyone else is considering it. What this tent is, in plain terms, is a roomy camping tent that uses inflatable air tubes instead of traditional metal poles. It is meant for people who want more comfort than a small backpacking tent, and who do not want to wrestle with a bunch of poles at the campsite. I have used it for short weekend trips and one longer stay where the weather bounced between warm afternoons and cold, damp nights. The thing that makes it feel different right away is the structure. Instead of snapping poles together and feeding them through sleeves, you are basically laying the tent out, staking a few points so it does not shift around, and then inflating the air columns. The first time I set it up, I was a little suspicious, because inflatable gear can feel flimsy in your head. In practice, once the tubes are filled and the guy lines are tensioned, it feels more solid than I expected. It does not have that brittle feeling you get from some fiberglass poles, and it does not creak or pop when the wind hits it. It just flexes a bit and settles. In terms of how it looks and feels, the fabric has that thicker, more structured hand feel you usually get on tents made for car camping, not ultralight trips. When I grabbed it and pulled it tight during setup, it did not feel like it would tear easily. The stitching and the stress points looked clean on my unit, and I spent a little time checking the corners and zipper seams because that is where I usually see problems. So far, nothing has started to separate or fray. The zippers feel smooth, although I will say I still use two hands and do not yank them fast, especially when the fabric is under tension. That is just how I treat tent zippers in general. Setup, day-to-day use, and pack up are where this tent basically earns its keep. When I roll into a campsite late, I do not want a complicated build. With this one, I clear the ground, spread it out, and I take an extra moment to square it up so it is not twisted. If you skip that step, you will feel it later when doors and corners do not line up perfectly. I stake it down enough that it will not slide, then I use the included pump to inflate. Inflation is not hard, but it does take some steady pumping. It is not something I would call effortless, but it is straightforward. The tent goes from flat to standing without me having to hold anything up. That is the part I like, because I can do it alone without the awkward moment where the tent half collapses while you are trying to insert the last pole. Once it is up, daily use is simple. The interior space feels practical for 3 adults who are mainly sleeping, or a small family with some gear inside. I have used it with a larger sleeping pad setup, and still had room to move around and change clothes without doing that hunched over shuffle. It is also a nicer place to wait out a passing rain, because you can sit and spread a few things out without everything touching the walls. Ventilation matters a lot to me, because condensation can ruin a trip even when it does not rain. On a cool night with damp air, I still got a little moisture because that is normal in a sealed tent. But it was manageable, and it did not turn into dripping walls. When I kept the vents open and cracked the door panels the right way, airflow was noticeably better than in smaller tents. The inside felt less stuffy in the morning, and the fabric dried out faster once the sun came up. I also noticed some small quality of life details that I actually used. There is a hook at the top where I hang a lantern. That seems minor, but it makes a big difference when you are trying to light the whole space evenly. There are interior pockets too, and I ended up using them every night for a phone, a headlamp, and keys. That meant I was not digging around in a bag in the dark. There is also a zip pass-through for a cable, which I used when I had a battery pack sitting outside under a small cover. It let me run power inside without leaving a big gap in the door. Whether performance is always the real test. I had one night with steady rain and occasional gusts. With the rainfly set properly and the stakes snug, I stayed dry. I did not see water pooling where I slept, and I did not wake up to damp gear. Wind-wise, the inflatable frame handled gusts better than I expected. It moved with the wind instead of fighting it, which in my experience can be a good thing. That said, you still have to use the guy lines. If you skip them because the tent looks stable, you are just making things harder on yourself when the wind picks up. Cold nights were fine in the sense that the tent did not feel drafty when everything was zipped correctly. But I want to be clear, A 4-season label does not mean you will be warm without the right sleeping setup. I was comfortable because I brought a proper sleeping bag and an insulated pad. The tent helped by blocking wind and managing moisture, not by creating heat. Portability is decent for what it is. This is not something I would hike with. I treat it like a car camping tent. Once you deflate it and roll it up, it goes into the carry bag without a fight if you take your time and push air out as you roll. If you rush it, it turns into that annoying wrestling match where the bag feels one size too small. I learned that the second time. Slow down, fold it clean, and it is fine. I should also talk about what I did not love. The pump works, but it is still manual effort. If you are setting up in hot weather after a long drive, you will feel it. Also, inflatable structures rely on valves and seals, so I keep an eye on those. I have not had a leak, but it is the kind of product where I would recommend checking the valves before each trip, just to avoid surprises. Another small thing is that you need a bit of space to pitch it properly. On tight sites with rocks and roots, it takes more time to find a flat footprint than it does with a smaller tent. One more note, because people ask this a lot. This tent does not require an app. There is no mobile app support, and honestly I am fine with that. For a tent, I want simple gear I can use when my phone is dead or when there is no signal. The only tech part of the experience is inflating it, and that is still a manual, hands-on process. After using it in real conditions, my overall impression is that it is a solid choice for someone who wants an easier setup than traditional pole tents, wants real interior space, and camps in mixed weather. It is not a lightweight option, and it is not the kind of tent I would buy if I only camp once a year and want the smallest, cheapest thing possible. But for regular car camping and longer stays where comfort and convenience matter, it has been reliable for me so far. You can find detailed information about the Zarfend 4-season easy setup glamping tent in the comments section. See you in the next video.